So can you describe what happened recently when the Taliban were very close?
Taliban قمرة وغرزوي قام يشربوا غرزوي برای عرف فكا شكا داغر مستشان كوبونا فرشلون فردغة تاور وكرا فرغة وكرا.
Were you fighting as well when they attacked?
Do
you find it hard to be brave when there's fighting?
هو أنا لسلاش وش مش كثير دوا بيعم برتنا بريجي خبرتهم وجني بعد ما بلاشيتكي وش مش بندي مش خبرت النور لكم.
You're much tougher than me. Good luck. You do the big one.
That's just stunning.
It's really... As part of the upcoming Vice on HBO episode, Afghanistan After Us, the boys in that clip who are helping defend their village from the Taliban are only 10, 12, and 14 years old. And joining us now, senior producer and reporter at Vice, Ben Anderson. Very good to have you.
When you went over there, I'm sure you were expecting bad news, but you couldn't have expected anything this shocking.
No, and that clip is heartbreaking because the one kid, when I pretend he hurt me when he did the fist bump, you know, for a second he looks like a kid again. And then almost in the same shot he goes back to you know, looking like the hardened fighter that he is. And this is Marja. This was the scene of the biggest operation since the start of the entire war. 30,000 US troops invaded, billions of dollars were spent, and it's now child soldiers and their commander, who is also their grandmother, a 53-year-old woman.
How unusual is this?
Not that unusual. All forces have child soldiers, child servants. It's not uncommon at all.
And are the children and grandmothers doing this because the fathers are gone fighting elsewhere or dead?
The fathers are fighting as well. I mean, a grandmother as a commander is very uncommon, but child soldiers, you see them on most bases in the Afghan army, Afghan police, and militia forces like the ones I was with there.
You know, about 45 years ago, Robert Coles, an eminent social psychologist here in the United States, did a series of books called Children of Crisis, and one of them was it was narrated from Northern Ireland, which was then in crisis with violence. And you look at the world today, you look at the clip that we just showed, and you look at the subcontinent of Africa, you have children's wars throughout the world raging. But this is particularly sad because of our past involvement in Afghanistan. And that's what they're left with now?
Yeah, I mean, the big promise of Operation Mushtarak in Marja was that we would deliver this government in a box, it was called. And that government in a box is non-existent. So every able-bodied person is having to fight and defend their village, and they really are fighting often. Two of those boys were kidnapped just a few days after we left them, and the grandmother kidnapped some Taliban family members, and they did an exchange. But that's normal life in Afghanistan.
Is that tribal life in Afghanistan? We of course look at it as global in implications, but stealing children from villages or family members, do they look at this as part of something much bigger, or do they just look at this as a fight for their village, village by village by village, without I think it is much more than that?
Yeah, it is village by village, and sometimes it's competition for the opium trade, sometimes it's people who are pro-Taliban, anti-Taliban, but it is very much village by village, and that's been the problem of Afghanistan. Assumed we could create a government that would represent the whole country. We've never come close to achieving that, and it's still absolutely different from village to village.
And so, Michael, still, I guess the question is, join in here and ask a question, but
sure,
there will be 1,000 questions asked by of those who say we should get out of Afghanistan with the situation in this deplorable state.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to, you know, the wreckage that's left behind. And the question I have for Ben is along those lines. How do those kids, and you said something I thought was very poignant, in that moment with that interaction with the fist bump, you saw the child for that brief moment. What is their view of us? How do particularly these Afghanis children look at the U.S. and what has been wrought there in their land?
I had a few meals with that family in their house. They said to me, the US created us, these Afghan local police units, these militias, and then abandoned us. So I think actually what you're seeing there is the legacy of us pulling out too quickly. Pulling out when the Taliban are resurgent and the Afghan security forces are nowhere near ready to provide security on their own. You know, people didn't want us to withdraw, but sometimes withdrawing has as many consequences as staying, or worse consequences.
So Ben, did you get the opportunity of spending time with these families to get a sense of what that inner child's life would be like were there no war that he was participating in. What would be their dream? To become an opium farmer? What would be their dream?
I mean, their reality would be to become an opium farmer. I said, do you ever wish you could, play football and go to school and be a normal kid? And he said, of course, I would love to go to school, but there is no school around here. And if we don't fight, then the Taliban will kill us all.
And by the way, to put some perspective on this, on how it's different from Iraq, and of course you've been all over Iraq, before the United States went there, this was their reality. I mean, you had the Taliban racing through there in the 1980s, a group that, last time I checked, had a 20-25% approval rating in Afghanistan. I mean, they've been terrorizing this country for 20 years. They were terrorizing this country before 9/11. They were raping little kids. They were, going into villages and doing the most horrific things before we ever even heard of Osama bin Laden.
I think the mistake with Afghanistan is to assume that the Taliban were almost an outside force with such a negative influence. And actually, ideologically, many of our allies don't differ much from the Taliban at all. You talked about young children being raped by the Taliban. They actually wiped out a lot of child rape, and our allies, the Afghan police, are notorious for having chai boys, they're called, young boys as servants. So the problem is that many of the things we tried to do were common across Afghanistan, not just common to the Taliban. So to try and rebuild that entire society in a fairly short amount of time, I think was a fantasy.
Yeah. Vice's Afghanistan After Us airs this Friday at 11 p.m. on HBO. Ben Anderson, incredible work. Thank you very, very much. Still ahead.